A new UK poll published in London's The Telegraph newspaper says 1/3 of scientists believe that government officials focused only on a minority of opinions in managing the COVID response, wrongly equating healthy scientific skepticism with science denialism. In the final segment of my interview for this week's episode with Dr. Ramesh Thakur from the Australian National University, we discuss how the media and social media censorship created a false sense that skeptical scientists were vastly outnumbered by others when they were not. He says this caused them to self-censor and not speak out to question the majority, which had serious negative effects being felt even today. Dr. Thakur says the scientific community must understand this error and work to ensure it doesn't happen again. Ramesh, one final report that we didn't mention was the poll data from the UK. This was a wide-ranging survey conducted by the Telegraph newspaper and Census Wide and published in March that found that 33%, 1/3 of scientists believe that officials had focused only on a minority of opinions. I love this line, wrongly equating scientific skepticism with scientific denialism. In other words, accusing people of being scientific deniers when in actual fact we were just being healthily skeptical.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it ties in with two other things that are important to remember. But as a premise, science is never settled. It's not an encyclopedia of accumulated facts. It's always work in progress. If scientists did not question existing consensus, we would never have any progress. We would still all be literally believers in a flat earth. So people who question and are skeptical are the ones who drive progress. Not all turn out to be right, but it's important to remember that.
Absolutely.
And that means they must have the freedom to be able to do it. But what happened was, this brings in the censorship industrial complex and the use of media and social media and big tech to impose and enforce the censorship. As a result of which, people who were skeptical never realized the extent of support they had amongst fellow scientists. They were deplatformed, they were not allowed to communicate, and they were demonized and vilified. And in many cases, the relevant regulatory authorities and colleges of medical associations, etc., came down hard on them as well. And so they feared loss of patronage, they feared loss of research grants, avenues for publication were shut down to them, which had severe career impacts. And most people, therefore, kept their heads below the parapet.
Unbelievable.
It's unfortunate because I think as I said in the article, there was a contagion of cowardice and complicity by the media as well. If they had spoken out, if they had defied it, all you need is up to 10% of all doctors saying, no, we do not agree with the official line. We think there's cause for further investigation. And in the meantime, we prefer to leave this to the doctor and patient in the privacy and confidentiality of the clinic, and it's for them to decide based on informed consent. No mandatory coercion by anyone. That would have collapsed. The narrative would have collapsed. And we would have had overall better health outcomes, even on COVID, I believe. Instead,
same thing happened with journalists, Ramesh. Same thing happened in newsrooms, right? People were afraid to speak out. Adam Crichton from The Australian was one of the few. And he, I think you mentioned in your article, he faulted a too credulous, incurious mainstream media, naive to the political and financial forces that push governments to assume the more sensible path of voluntary COVID-19 vaccination. And he was hammered for it. He was criticised and slammed from all sides. And
he had to change his phone number, if I remember right. I think he was subjected to all sorts of things. I think the one magazine, as it happens, that stood out in the world in this sense was The Spectator Australia. And more kudos to them.
But I do think it doesn't help when you've got a $1 billion+ funded government media machine sitting in the middle of the media in Australia, feeding out the propaganda of the state and the line of the state with very little criticism.
Well, just critique. One final comment on that, which goes beyond what I said in the article, and that is that what we see across the Western world is essentially a split between the elites and the ordinary people. And elites based in the metropolitan cities and including the educational, cultural, legal, etc. We saw that with The Voice and other people out in the country, if you like, in Australia, the Highlands land. And the elites are, in many respects, waging a war on their own people and losing. The most recent example, the twin referendum in Ireland, the farmers' revolt in Europe on net zero, the election of right of centre parties in Italy, Netherlands, possibly coming up in Germany, most recently in Portugal. So I think there is a pushback now. And what COVID did do was, once the trust in institutions fell away, many more people are now starting to look more critically and skeptically at other items on the agenda, including climate change and net zero. So it's interesting. I don't know if you've seen the new movie, Climate, a movie. I forget who it's done by, but it's got a lot of serious people. It's more than an hour long. A lot of well-credentialed, serious people pointing out, going back to conspiracy theories, pointing out that there's been a silence, that this 97% scientific consensus thing is a myth, and a manufactured myth, deliberately created myth.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, modelling mistaken for scientific research was, I think, the line you used in the article, right? Mm-hmm. This is modelling, scientific modelling, and people look at the modelling and go, whoa, that's the reality. That's the scientific fact, that modelling.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where the temperature's going to go. That's where the number of deaths. If you look at the modelling from COVID early on, it was completely wrong on many levels. And there's a lot to be said for the fact that the modelling on climate and temperature increase is potentially very, questionable. And yet we're not even having that discussion anymore. We've passed that. We've moved beyond that now. It's just accepted. Now we can't even get people to agree to a free market of different energy options. So that's a whole other story. Ramesh, we are out of time. I could talk to you all day. Wonderful to speak to you. Great to have you on the show. Will you come back again sometime?
We'll look forward to that. Thanks, Damian.
Thanks very much for your time. Dr. Ramesh Thakur there on the other side. I don't believe those conspiracy theories that Google and YouTube are suppressing right-wing content. I think they're fair to everybody. Let's prove that right. Get onto that subscription button down there and press it, get the bell pressed, and watch the full episodes here. Have a look at pressing that button too. I mean, there's so many buttons to press to subscribe. Just subscribe.